Hello friends and welcome to the Southern Mountain Kitchen. Today we're going to make made from scratch buttermilk biscuits and sausage gravy. So everything you see on my counter is what we're going to use to make these biscuits. And believe it or not, this is not a hard process. Really, you have some very simple ingredients going into this. It's very easy to mix up, and if you follow the directions step by step, you will be in such good shape to make amazing biscuits that I swear sometimes these are just my favorite thing in the world to eat because they taste better than most restaurants, and they definitely taste better than anything that came out of the freezer section or the refrigerated section. The one thing you need to make sure of though, if you look in the center of my counter, that stick says butter on it. We're not dealing with margarine, we're doing real butter. So you need to make sure you have the real thing when you get it. Shop around, you can find a good price on this. So in the meantime, we want to preheat our ovens to 425 degrees. And then we're going to go ahead and take our stick of butter, which you should put in the freezer probably for half an hour before we shred it up like this. That'll make it easier for it to shred. And make sure as you're shredding down, you're going to pull back that paper so we don't get any of that in there. And just work it until you get this done, because remember, the less we handle the butter the better, because that means the less chance it has to melt, because we want this to stay cold. We want the buttermilk that goes in this to be cold, because that's going to help in the long run for our biscuits to turn out really well. We don't want anything to get to room temperature. We want this cold. So go ahead and shred up the rest of your butter, and then when you get done with that, we're going to transfer this into a large bowl. You need something large to work in where you can get your hand in there and make this work. So go ahead, put all your butter into your bowl. I have a really large one here that I'm using, but that works for what I'm doing, and that makes a lot of room for me to put my hand in there with a fork. So on top of this, we are adding a half a teaspoon of sugar, 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt, a half a teaspoon of baking soda, 1 tablespoon of baking powder, and then we're going to add to this 2 cups of all-purpose flour. And when we get this all in here, we're going to take a fork and we're going to start to mix this up, because we want to break up that butter even smaller, because the ideal thing with this is to get it down to where it's as small as possibly like a grain of rice. So just go ahead and work it until you go all the way around all the sides and through the bottom of the bowl, because this is the way we want to make sure we get all the way through it. And a fork works for me. If you want to use something else, that's up to you, but this is just the way I find that it works. So go ahead and just work your way through that bowl, and just make sure you don't see any larger pieces of butter. So this is going to take a second to go through the whole thing, but then once we're done with that, we're going to add some buttermilk. So we're going to start out with 1 cup. This is not all the buttermilk that's going in here. We're going to use this at first to kind of bind everything together, and then we're going to add more, because ideally you're going to need 1 1/4 cups to possibly 1 1/2, depending on if when you were putting your flour in you added a little extra. So I say put the first cup in and then just add a little bit at a time until you work it through, until everything is really sticking together. And you're going to notice that when it becomes one good large mass, you've got enough buttermilk. So that's why I say put it in a little bit at a time after that first cup, because you don't want to overload it, because it's easier to add a little more buttermilk than to remove it after you put too much in. So keep mixing it, and as you can see, mine is really sticking together, so we got into a good spot. So next, you're going to need some things. You need some aluminum foil. You need a pan to put these in to bake them, some non-stick cooking spray. You're going to need a cutter for the biscuits, and then you're going to need that about a half a cup of flour that we had earlier, because we're going to put that on the cutting board so that way things don't stick. So once you get all of these things together, we're going to set up the pan first, because we want to make sure that we can get these out easily. So this is a 9-inch cake pan, and I pulled out some aluminum foil. Now if you notice, the foil goes straight across in one direction all the way to the edges of the pan, which is perfect, so that works really well. But it sticks out a little bit in the other 2 directions. That's perfectly fine, because we're going to use that later to actually pull these biscuits out after they're cooked, so we don't burn our hands, but it's easy to remove them from where you're cooking them, so it's perfect. So get this foil in there, press it down as best you can, and just kind of tuck those extra sides down a little bit. Then we're going to spray it with non-stick cooking spray, because we want to get a good coating in there, so that way our biscuits don't stick to the actual foil, but they're easy to remove. So go ahead and take that extra flour that you had, put it onto your cutting board counter or whatever you're using, and just spread it out a bit. And one good secret about this is put your hand in the flour and get it really coated, because if you're going to be touching the dough with that, you don't want it to stick into your hand. It's still going to stick a little bit, but this way at least it's not going to stick that much. So I pulled out a portion of my dough. I'm going to put a little bit of flour on top so that way I can press it down. I'm just going to fold this over a couple of times because that's going to give me some layers in this. Now you could fold it up to 5 times. That's your choice. And just till we get to a point where we feel like we folded it enough, then press it out with your hands. Do not use a rolling pin. It will not work with this. It doesn't do what we want it to do. We want to do this with our hand. And just try to make it flat to where you're going to be cutting into something that's almost an inch thick. And then take your cutter and push in. Now you could flour that cutter. I didn't have to because there's already flour on top of my dough. If you don't put the flour on top of the dough, you're going to need the cutter to be put into some flour. But otherwise, go ahead and just keep doing this. Add a little bit more of the dough from the pan into this as we're going, and just roll it out with your hand, flatten it out, and then put the cutter in and just pull these biscuits out. You're going to get about 8 biscuits from this, which is great. Now, when I put these into my pan at the end to cook them, literally there's going to be only room for 7. The 8th one is always kind of like that mongrel biscuit that comes out at the end. And I usually just roll it up and make a biscuit by hand with it, because that always ends up going to my dog. So, and he loves biscuits, so there you go. But go ahead and cut these out, as many as you can, and get them going. Now, mind you, if you didn't want to use the 9-inch pan, like if you had 2 8-inch cake pans, you could split your biscuits up in that, or you can even make more of them if you wanted. It's really your choice how many you think you're going to need. So go ahead and do your deal with this, get them all rolled out and cut. And then, like I said, with this, there's about enough for 8. So get them completely done, and we're going to move on to the next step, because what you see right there is basically what I had left over. So when they're cut, we're going to put them into their pan, and we're going to run them around the edges and try to fit them into where they're almost up against each other, but there might be a little bit of breathing room in there. And then we're going to add them till we got all of them in, which, like I said, this is going to fit about 7 of these, because these biscuits are going to bake up really big. I like big biscuits, and that's why I do them this way. So if our oven is warm enough, these are going to go in there in just a minute, and they're going to have to bake from anywhere from 15 to 20 minutes, and that's at 425. You have to make sure that oven is hot before you put them in. Now, while they're baking, you need to get a bowl where you can actually stick in your microwave. We're going to add maybe 3 tablespoons of butter to this. We're going to end up melting it because we're going to brush the tops of these when they come back out. So the best thing to do is to go ahead and get your butter melted ahead of time and have it ready, and have something to brush it on with. Now I have this little brush deal. You can get these really cheap at a dollar store or something like that, but you could use anything from like a spoon or whatever to put it on with. So here mine are out of the oven, and I'm going to brush the top. And the best thing about brushing it with the butter is if you had any excess flour, it gets rid of it. Makes them a little golden, gives them a little bit of flavor, and that's perfect. So we're going to brush these and get them really coated on top and let them sit for about 2 minutes before we go to remove them. So that way the butter soaks in a bit and it has a perfect chance to get inside before we do anything with them. So go ahead, let them sit for a sec, and that way that butter is going to get in there. It's going to give it even more flavor, and that's what you want to see. So, and when we're done to remove them, we're going to actually take the foil that we tucked under the sides and pull it out so that way we can get a hold. So reach under the edge of it without burning your fingers and pull it out. And then when you do this, you literally can grab a hold of this and just lift these right out of the pan. That way, no muss, no fuss, it's done. And when you break these apart, as you can see with mine, they are going to be steaming here because it is so hot. But the best thing is you don't burn your fingers getting them out, trying to pull them out one at a time, or you don't break them up. They're easily pulled out and set aside like that. And then I just put them on a plate to put them on the table, and this is it. And this is really great. And as you can see when I break this one open, there's lots of layers in here, lots of taste. It's really wonderful. So everything we have on the counter here is what we're going to use to make the sausage gravy. And you see onions on here. This is an option. Not everybody uses them. You can if you want to. It's a personal preference, and I like them. So there's a half a cup of onion there. You can leave this out. So what we're going to do is start out in our frying pan with about 1/2 pound of sausage, which if you're using one of those logs of sausage that you get from the grocery store, you're going to use about half of it. We're not trying to overload this with the sausage. And then I'm adding in onions, which is this half a cup. Again, optional. It's a personal preference. If you don't want it, you don't have to eat it. Some people don't like onion, and that's okay. So we're going to cook this until the sausage is no longer pink and that we have our onions looking translucent. And then we're going to add about 1.5 tablespoons of butter to this, because we're trying to get a little bit of oil in the bottom of the pan, because if you had a lot of grease when you cooked up the sausage, you want to drain some of that off because you don't want it being really greasy. So once we get this butter completely melted, we're going to add in our next ingredients. So we're going to add to this about 1/4 cup of flour. And depending on how much you've got in your pan there as far as like moisture is concerned, you can dial down the flour a little bit, or if you have a little bit of extra oil from before, you can add a little bit more flour to compensate for that. Now we're going to mix this up and cook it for a couple of minutes until the floury taste goes away. And then we're going to start adding our milk, because we are adding 1.5 cups of milk, but I only put so much of the milk in at first to kind of mix up the ingredients, and then I come in later and add the rest of my milk. So I kind of like split it in half. That way it's a little bit easier to get everything wet and mixed through to begin with. And once I get everything completely mixed and it's simmering here, I'm going to add the rest of my milk in. And once the other part of the milk is into it, it's time to stir it all up again. We're going to want to cook this for a while for it to simmer and thicken, because it will take several minutes before it starts to thicken up. And you might think, wow, this is taking a long time, it's not going to happen. It will thicken up. It takes about 3-4 minutes to at least start doing it, and you'll notice a difference once it starts to thicken. But I like to get everything mixed up in it before I add my seasonings, and those will come in just a minute. So into this mix, I am adding 1/4 teaspoon of salt, 1/4 teaspoon of seasoned salt, 1/4 teaspoon of garlic powder, and then about 1/2 teaspoon of black pepper, which if you don't like black pepper that much, you can dial that back to about 1/4 or less for pepper, or even for salt for that matter. And go ahead and mix this up, and we're going to stir this and let it thicken. And it's going to keep going until everything is mixed together. And as it thickens up, this is going to be really great. It's going to be kind of silky and everything, and you're going to have this great taste of all these spices and with your sausage. So continue to stir until you thicken, and like I said, when you notice it start thickening, you will know that it's to the point where it's almost completely done. Because some people like thicker gravy than others. I kind of like it middle of the road. So as you can see with mine, it is thickening now. Once you get this done, you are going to want to serve it over some biscuits, which is what I'm going to do as soon as mine is completely mixed up. Now, some people will put this over toast. You can do that. It's not really a personal preference of mine, but if you like it that way, that's fine. They have a nasty little term for that because they call it SOS. I'm not going to tell you what that means because it's using bad language. But anyway. And then you're just going to spoon your sausage gravy over top of the biscuits, or you can break them up and spoon it over that way. And when it's done, it looks something like this. And this has such a great taste, and it has a kick because of the sausage and the spices. I hope you liked this video, and if you did, please like and subscribe. And if you get a chance, check out the Southern Mountain Kitchen website, where you can get a free recipe, check out the cookbooks available from the Southern Mountain Kitchen, and if you'd like to, you could order a cookbook at a discounted price, cheaper than Amazon, with shipping that is also cheaper than Amazon. So if you get a chance, check it out, and I hope you have a great day.